Hey guys, tonight, we're drifting into the cold, creaking hulls of the past, into the lives of medieval sailors who dared to cross the brutal, wind-battered seas of the North Atlantic and beyond. You'll see how they lived, how they survived, and what they endured night after night, wave after wave. Most people today imagine medieval sailors as strong men in simple boats, pushing into open waters with little more than the stars above and hope in their hearts. But the truth is far grimmer and far more fascinating. Let's begin where many of these journeys did, in a bustling European port city in the 13th century. Somewhere like Bristol or Lisbon or Genoa, the docks were chaotic. Wooden ships creaked and groaned against the tide. Seagulls screamed overhead, and the air stank of salt, fish guts, and human sweat. Medieval ships, such as cogs and caravels, were primitive by modern standards, short, broad, and built of oak planks hammered together with iron nails. They leaked constantly. No voyage began without barrels of tar and wool to plug the inevitable holes. Before setting sail, a sailor's world was reduced to a handful of possessions: a knife, a wool tunic, a thick rope belt, maybe a small pouch of salted meat if he was lucky. There were no suitcases, no beds, and absolutely no bathrooms. Life aboard was rough, even before the anchor rose. The crew itself was a mix of rough men. Not just seasoned sailors, but criminals working off sentences, runaway peasants, younger sons of noblemen seeking adventure, and poor men desperate to feed their families. Many had never even been on a ship before. Once all the barrels of salted pork, dried peas, hardtack, and beer were loaded, once the final cargo of wool or wine or furs was tied down, the captain would shout the order, and the ship would lurch away from the shore, pulled slowly at first, then caught by the wind. That first night at sea was the easiest. The coast was still visible in the distance, the wind was mild, and the men sang together as they adjusted the sails. But they knew what lay ahead: sickness, storms, thirst, and maybe death. And they knew that every day at sea took them farther from home and deeper into the unknown. And so it begins. As the coastline shrank behind them and the endless gray horizon stretched ahead, the rhythm of sea life began. Aboard a medieval ship, there was no such thing as comfort. Every part of the vessel served a purpose, and every man aboard had a role, whether he liked it or not. The deck was the heart of everything, exposed to wind, rain, sun, and storms. Below it, a cramped and gloomy cargo hold reeked of mold, fish oil, and damp wood. Sailors rarely slept below. Most nights, they wrapped themselves in coarse wool blankets and found a place on the open deck to lie down, if the weather allowed it. There were no hammocks in these early ships. If it rained, you stayed wet. If it froze, you shivered. If it stormed, you clung to the mast and prayed. Every day, the men worked in shifts. One group handled the rigging, adjusting the sails, scraping barnacles off the hull, or manning the tiller. Another kept watch, looking out for sudden squalls, pirate sails, or floating debris. The rest, when not on duty, tried to sleep or eat or simply endure the boredom. Food was repetitive, bland, and hard on the teeth. The typical meal: salted meat so dry it had to be soaked in seawater just to chew it. Hardtack, a kind of rock-hard biscuit that was often infested with weevils. If you were lucky, you'd shake out the insects before biting. If not, you just chewed them along with the biscuit. It didn't really matter. No one complained. Complaining didn't stop the hunger. Fresh water was stored in wooden barrels and turned foul within days. Beer or watered-down wine lasted longer and was often safer to drink. The men knew this, and they drank often, not for celebration, but for survival. There was no hygiene aboard. None. Most sailors relieved themselves off the side of the ship or used a shared bucket. They rarely changed clothes, and some went months without washing. Their hair and beards grew long and tangled, their fingernails caked with dirt and tar. Rats skittered across the deck at night, and lice burrowed into every fold of cloth. But again, this was normal, expected, even welcomed. A ship without rats usually meant there was no food at all. Illness struck early and often. One of the most feared was scurvy, a slow, miserable condition caused by the absence of fresh fruits or vegetables. Gums would swell and bleed, teeth loosened and fell out, joints ached terribly, and skin developed sores. The men didn't know what caused it. They called it the scorbutic disease or sea rot, and when it came, they had no cure. Some tried to chew on strips of pine bark. Others drank vinegar or garlic in oil, but none of it helped. Once the signs appeared, it was only a matter of time. Yet still, they sailed. There were no charts like we have today. Navigation relied on the stars, the direction of the wind, the color of the sea. A skilled navigator could read the heavens, noting Polaris, the North Star, or judging their position by the height of the sun. But fog, storms, and overcast skies could block the heavens for days. That meant drifting, guessing, and hoping. And through it all, the ship groaned. Every gust of wind in the sails strained the masts. Every wave slammed into the hull like a hammer. And every day, the wood swelled, creaked, and splintered just a little more. The sea was not a place of adventure. It was a place of endurance. Days at sea were unpredictable. Sometimes the wind would vanish entirely, and the ship would sit dead on the water, sails hanging limp, the ocean flat like polished glass. Other times, it arrived with such fury that men had to climb the rigging in pitch black, soaked and frozen, just to wrestle the sails down before they ripped to pieces. Storms were not occasional. They were expected. One moment the skies were pale and empty. Then the horizon darkened. Wind came in quick, sharp gusts, and before anyone could tie down the loose ropes, it was too late. Thunder rolled across the waves like cannon fire. Rain came sideways, hard as gravel. Waves rose taller than the mast. The entire ship tilted, groaned, and sprayed freezing salt water over the deck with every crash. Men clung to the rigging or tied themselves to the railings to avoid being swept overboard. Some ships carried no lifeboats. If you went over, you were gone. No one dove in after you. They couldn't. There was no way back. Even when the storm passed, it left damage behind. Snapped ropes, torn sails, bruised bodies, sometimes worse. A broken mast could end the journey. A cracked hull meant slow sinking, with nothing to do but bail out water by hand and hope the wind would carry you to land in time. But even worse than storms was stillness. Days, even weeks, with no wind at all. Trapped in the same spot under a burning sun, the ship baking like an oven. The barrels ran low. The meat began to rot. Water turned sour, and tempers frayed. There was no entertainment, no books, no instruments for most. Some men told stories. Others carved bits of wood or mended clothes. But the silence could be louder than any storm. It pressed into your thoughts, into your dreams, and soon, the line between days and nights began to blur. Men grew paranoid. Some believed the ship was cursed. Others said the wind would never return. Fights broke out. Some simply curled up in corners and refused to move. In those moments, survival had nothing to do with weather or food. It was about the mind, because the sea didn't just wear down your body. It wore down your spirit, and there was no land in sight. Survival at sea required more than strength. It required order. A ship, no matter how small, functioned like a floating kingdom ruled not by democracy, but by absolute hierarchy. And that hierarchy was enforced with strict discipline. At the top stood the captain. He wasn't always the owner of the ship, and he wasn't always liked. But his word was final. In the chaos of the open sea, unity was more important than popularity. Disobedience, even hesitation, could mean death for one man or for everyone. The captain gave orders, decided direction, chose when to drop anchor, when to turn back, and when to press forward. But below him were other ranks, the boatswain who managed the deck and ropes, the helmsman who steered the rudder, and the quartermaster who oversaw supplies. These men acted as both officers and enforcers. For the ordinary sailor, life meant obedience. Tasks were shouted, repeated, and carried out without argument. Raise the sail, scrub the deck, secure the barrels, haul the anchor. It didn't matter if your hands were blistered or your feet frozen. The ship moved with or without your comfort. Punishment was swift and brutal. Stealing food could mean being whipped or tied to the mast and left in the rain. Striking an officer, that could lead to being thrown overboard. Desertion in port, if caught, often meant death. But order wasn't kept through cruelty alone. The crew relied on each other. In a storm, your life might depend on the man next to you. Trust was earned through sweat, silence, and survival. Still, tension never left the deck. Long voyages bred resentment. Some captains abused their power. Others ignored complaints or hoarded the best rations for themselves and their favorites. Mutiny was rare, but not unheard of, especially when death seemed more likely than reaching land. And then there was religion. Every ship carried its own strange blend of superstition and belief. Some sailors prayed openly, crossing themselves before storms or whispering to saints. Others carried amulets, or painted eyes on the front of the ship to see danger ahead. But all sailors, regardless of faith, feared the same thing: the deep, because below the surface, unseen and unknown, was a world no one understood. Sea monsters, angry gods, or simply darkness without end. These thoughts crept in during the long nights, when the stars vanished and the waves slapped the hull like a quiet, steady heartbeat. And still they pressed forward, because turning back was never an option. In the middle of the sea, there were no doctors, no healers, no medicine, except what little wisdom a sailor or cook might have picked up from an apothecary years ago. If a man fell ill or suffered injury, it was left to chance, and to the crude hands of those around him. The most common injuries were simple and deadly. A slip on a wet deck could mean a shattered leg or a cracked skull. A falling rope or broken spar could crush a shoulder or slice through flesh. And even the smallest cut, a splinter, a torn nail, a blister, could rot into infection within days. There were no antibiotics, no clean bandages. Wounds were packed with rags or washed with seawater. Sometimes vinegar was poured over them, if any was available. It burned, and it didn't help much. For toothaches, the cure was to yank the tooth out with fingers, knives, or pliers if available. Men screamed and then bled and then kept working. But the worst illnesses didn't come from injury. They came from within. Slow-moving fevers, sudden stomach cramps, or mysterious rashes that spread from one sailor to the next without warning. Dysentery was common, caused by spoiled food or foul water. It left men dehydrated and weak, barely able to stand. Typhus, carried by lice, could sweep through a ship and leave half the crew curled in their blankets, shaking with fever. Some recovered, some didn't. And then, of course, was scurvy. Always scurvy. Teeth fell out. Old scars reopened. Gums bled for no reason. Muscles weakened. Sailors with scurvy often looked decades older than they were. Their skin drawn tight, their eyes sunken, their limbs thin and stiff. Once it took hold, there was no stopping it, and no one knew how to prevent it. Some thought it came from the salt air. Others believed it was punishment from God. There were always theories. None of them helped. When a man died, there was no ceremony, no coffin. His belongings, if he had any, were claimed by the others. His body was wrapped in sailcloth, weighted with rocks or scrap iron, and slid over the side. A splash, then silence. The ship moved on. There was always more ocean, always more work, always more waiting, because death at sea was not rare. It was routine. Finding your way at sea was not easy. There were no GPS signals, no radios, no engines, just the wind, the sky, the water. Sailors watched the stars. At night, they looked for Polaris, the North Star. It always pointed north. In clear skies, this worked well. But when clouds covered the sky, they had to guess. They used a tool called a quadrant. It measured the height of the sun or stars. But it was slow, and not very accurate. A few degrees off could mean missing land by miles. During the day, sailors watched the waves. The shape of the water told them where the wind was going. The color of the sea could hint at depth. In shallower waters, the sea turned green. In deeper areas, it became dark blue or even black. They listened to birds. If birds circled close, land was near. If birds flew straight and fast, they were returning to land. That meant land was in the direction they were flying. They looked for floating plants, seaweed, driftwood, anything that meant they were near a coast. But often it was just hope. They sailed in one direction for weeks. No land, just sky and water. Sometimes they missed islands, passed right by them in fog. Other times they thought they saw land, but it was clouds on the horizon. Sailors called them false shores. Mistakes could be deadly. A wrong heading meant weeks lost. Supplies ran low. Men got sick. Spirits dropped. Captains carried old charts. Hand-drawn maps. Some were based on stories. Others copied from older maps. Many were wrong, but they were all they had. The ocean had no roads, just winds, tides, luck, and every journey was a gamble. Sailors didn't cross oceans for fun. There was always a reason, purpose. Usually it was trade. Ships carried goods, heavy, valuable goods, things that could not be made at home, or things that sold for more in faraway lands. In the north, ships left ports filled with wool. Thick English wool was in high demand. It was sent to Flanders, to France, to Italy. Other ships carried salt. Salt was gold in some places. Preserved meat, kept fish from rotting. Whole towns lived off the salt trade. Wine was shipped north. Olive oil too. These came from Spain or southern France. Rich men in colder countries paid well for them. In the east, spices were king. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg. These were rare, light, and expensive. Just a few sacks could make a fortune. From Africa came ivory, gold, and slaves. This was a darker part of trade. But it happened, and sailors were part of it. The cargo was packed tight. Barrels of goods, crates of cloth, bundles of fur, jars of honey, bolts of silk, sometimes weapons, sometimes armor. Rats lived in the cargo. They ate what they could. Sailors killed them when they saw them, but they never got them all. Protecting the cargo was key. If it was lost, the whole trip failed. The captain could be ruined, the crew unpaid, the owners angry. Some ships were attacked. Pirates waited in known routes, fast ships with sharp blades. They took what they wanted and left the rest to sink. To stop this, some ships carried guards, men with swords, bows, crossbows, but often it wasn't enough. Sailing was business, a dangerous one, but if you returned, if the cargo made it, the reward could be great. At least for the owners. The sailors were paid little, but they sailed anyway, because the sea was the only place left to go. Each day at sea was much like the day before, repetitive, hard, slow. The sun rose, sometimes hidden behind thick clouds. Sailors woke up to the sound of waves and creaking wood. They climbed out of their places on the deck or below, wherever they had tried to rest. Breakfast was simple. Hardtack soaked in beer or water. Salted meat if there was any left. Sometimes no food at all. After eating, work began. Cleaning the deck, repairing sails, checking ropes, hauling up the anchor if it was time to move. The captain and officers gave orders. The crew followed them. No questions, no delays. When work was done, men waited, watched the sea, watched the sky. Sometimes they talked quietly, shared stories, told tales of home. Many believed in luck. Small rituals kept hope alive. Before setting sail, sailors might cross themselves, touch a lucky charm, avoid stepping on a rope. Some carried small wooden carvings. Others whispered prayers to saints. They believed the sea was alive, watching, judging. No sailor wanted to offend the waves. At night, when stars appeared, the watch stood guard, eyes searching the dark, listening to the wind. Those off duty tried to sleep, wrapped in rough blankets, huddled close to stay warm. The cold bit deep. Even in summer, the wind chilled. Sailors dreamed of land, fields, fires, warm food, but the sea kept them moving. The routine was endless, and time slowed. The days stretched on, one bleeding into the next, and with each passing moment, the vast emptiness of the ocean pressed harder on the minds of the men. It wasn't just the cold or the hunger that wore them down. It was the crushing solitude, the endless horizon that offered no sign of life or hope beyond the endless waves. Sailors often found themselves staring at the sky, searching for shapes in the clouds or the faint glow of distant lights that might signal another ship or a hint of land. Their voices grew quieter as the silence settled over the deck, and even the bravest men found their thoughts wandering toward memories of home, the warmth of a hearth, the laughter of family, or the simple comfort of solid ground beneath their feet. In those moments, time seemed to slow, the sea's unyielding rhythm matched by the pounding of their own hearts, and it became clear that surviving the harsh seas required not only strength of body but an iron will to endure the loneliness that threatened to swallow them whole as the voyage stretched on. The sailors quickly learned that the sea was an enemy both unpredictable and relentless. Storms could rise without warning, turning calm waters into roaring maelstrom that threatened to swallow the ship whole. Waves crashed over the deck, soaking men to the bone and tearing at the sails with vicious force, while the wind screamed like a living thing, twisting ropes and bending the masts until they creaked under the strain. In those moments, every man had to act swiftly and without hesitation, working together in near silence to secure the ship's fragile structure against the wrath of the storm. Yet, even when the skies calmed, the challenges remained. Relentless cold that seeped into bones, salt water that burned eyes and raw skin, and the constant threat of exhaustion that left muscles trembling and minds fogged. The sea showed no mercy, and those who sailed it had to accept that survival was as much a battle against the elements as it was a test of endurance, courage, and the ability to find calm amid chaos. Every day spent on the vast, open ocean was a reminder of how fragile life truly was for medieval sailors. The wooden ship beneath their feet creaked and groaned with every swell and dip of the waves, as if the very vessel was fighting to stay afloat against the relentless power of the sea. Men knew that a single mistake, one snapped rope, one missed knot, or one poorly tied sail, could lead to disaster. Illness lingered like a shadow among the crew, invisible but deadly, spreading quietly from man to man through close quarters and shared supplies. There was no escape from the stench of salt, sweat, and sickness that hung in the air like a thick fog, and the smallest cut could fester into a fatal wound because of the lack of proper medical care. Hunger gnawed endlessly at their bellies, and fresh water became a treasure more precious than gold. But perhaps the most crushing weight was the knowledge that if the ship were lost, if the storm claimed them or the sickness took hold, there would be no rescue, no last rites, and no homecoming. Each man carried that silent fear deep inside, alongside a stubborn hope that somehow, against all odds, they would reach land again and live to tell the tale. Among all the dangers that threatened medieval sailors, none was as insidious or relentless as the slow march of scurvy and starvation. Deprived of fresh fruits and vegetables, the men's bodies began to betray them in subtle ways at first. A swollen gum here, a persistent ache there, signs they could not fully understand. As weeks passed, the symptoms grew harsher. Gums bleeding, teeth loosening and falling out, joints stiffening and aching so much movement became agony. The disease sapped strength, drained hope, and robbed the crew of the energy needed to fight the stormy seas or even perform the simplest tasks. Food, when available, was often hardtack or salted meat, both of which provided little in the way of nutrition or comfort. Water barrels became foul and undrinkable, forcing men to ration what little fresh water remained or drink weak beer that barely quenched thirst. Starvation wasn't sudden. It crept in slowly, stealing weight, dulling minds, and making the already brutal conditions nearly impossible to endure. The worst part was the helplessness. No remedy, no escape, only the knowledge that time was running out, while the ship continued to roll onward, carried by the cold, unforgiving waves. In the midst of hardship and relentless danger, something unexpected took root among the crew. A quiet brotherhood forged by necessity and shared struggle. Bound together by the endless ocean and the unforgiving conditions, the sailors learned to rely on each other not just for survival, but for comfort in the darkest hours. Small acts, a helping hand hauling a heavy rope, a shared piece of hardtack, or a whispered word of encouragement during a storm, became lifelines. Even those who entered the ship as strangers grew into a tight-knit group, their fates intertwined with every sway of the vessel. This fragile trust was as crucial as the sails catching the wind, for when exhaustion and despair threatened to overwhelm, It was the strength of this bond that kept men steady. Though the sea remained indifferent to their fate, the crew's quiet resilience gave them purpose beyond mere survival. A reason to keep fighting, to hold on, and to believe that beyond the horizon, land and life awaited. Days blurred into one another, each filled with the same repetitive motions and endless chores that slowly drained both body and mind. The ceaseless rhythm of raising sails, tightening ropes, scrubbing the deck, and standing watch offered little respite or variety. Even the changing weather brought no relief. Harsh sun and biting cold seemed equally relentless. Fatigue built up like a tide, heavy and unyielding, pressing down on the crew's spirits as much as their aching muscles. Sleep was scarce and often broken by the harsh cries of seagulls, the creak of timbers, or the sudden slap of waves against the hull. The monotony bred restlessness and tension, small irritations flaring into arguments that had to be quickly suppressed for the sake of survival. Yet in the midst of it all, the men clung to any small pleasure, a brief moment of laughter, the taste of a rare fresh biscuit, or the faint hope that the next sunrise might bring them closer to land. Even so, the endless routine threatened to wear them down more surely than any storm or sickness, making every day a slow, grinding test of endurance in the vast emptiness of the sea. Where every sight was the same and danger lurked in every wave, sailors often turned to faith and superstition to find meaning and comfort. Many believed that the gods and saints watched over them, protecting them from storms, shipwrecks, and unseen dangers below the surface. Before setting sail, it was common to perform rituals, crossing oneself, offering prayers, or leaving small tokens of devotion in chapels or on the ship itself. Superstitions flourished in the cramped quarters, from avoiding certain actions believed to bring bad luck, such as whistling on deck or speaking ill of the sea, to carrying charms or talismans said to ward off evil spirits. Sailors believed that breaking these rules could anger the spirits of the ocean, leading to disasters or endless storms. Even the ship itself was treated with respect, often believed to possess a spirit that needed appeasing. While modern minds might dismiss these beliefs, for medieval sailors they were a vital part of the psychological armor needed to face the uncertainty and terror of their voyages. Faith and superstition offered a sense of control in an uncontrollable world, helping men endure the endless days and nights spent adrift on the unforgiving seas. Discipline aboard a medieval ship was strict, often harsh, and absolutely necessary for survival. The captain's authority was absolute, and any sign of weakness or disobedience could threaten the entire crew. Commands were given clearly and expected to be followed without hesitation or complaint. Punishments for breaking rules were severe. Floggings with ropes or whips, confinement to the ship's hold, or even being cast overboard in extreme cases. These measures, brutal as they seem, were meant to maintain order in an environment where chaos could quickly become fatal. The cramped quarters and constant danger left little room for personal freedom, and tensions frequently ran high. Yet, despite the severity, discipline created a structure that held the fragile crew together, turning a group of disparate men into a functioning unit. It was this order that often determined who would live to see land again, and who would be lost to the sea's merciless depths. The cold was a silent and relentless enemy that gnawed at the sailors' bodies from the moment they left the shore. Even in warmer months, the ocean wind cut through layers of rough woolen clothing, chilling men to the bone. At night, temperatures dropped sharply, and the dampness from spray and sweat soaked into garments, turning them into icy weights. Hypothermia was a constant threat, especially during storms when sailors were drenched and unable to find shelter. Hands and feet often became numb and blistered, making simple tasks like climbing the rigging or gripping ropes painfully difficult. The cold seeped into bones, sapping strength and dulling the senses, while sleep was elusive and restless. To combat this, sailors huddled together for warmth, wrapped themselves tightly in whatever blankets or furs they had, and kept moving whenever possible. Still, the sea's cold claimed many lives quietly and without fanfare, a grim reminder that sometimes the enemy was not the storm, but the endless chill that lived in the air and water. Beyond the physical hardships, medieval sailors wrestled daily with shadows that no man could see but all could feel, the invisible weight of fear and the unknown. The ocean was vast and mysterious, a place where legends thrived and nightmares took shape in the restless minds of men isolated from the world. Stories of sea monsters, vengeful spirits, and cursed waters filled quiet moments, passed from one trembling voice to another under the cold night sky. The unknown stretched endlessly ahead. Unmapped islands, hidden reefs, sudden storms, and each voyage was a venture into uncertainty where survival hinged on skill and luck. This fear was both a burden and a necessary caution, sharpening senses and fostering respect for the ocean's power. Yet, it also wore on men's spirits, deepening loneliness and sometimes breeding despair. Sailors had to find strength in camaraderie, faith, and the hope that each day might bring a glimpse of land, or at least calm waters beneath a forgiving sky. Even as the days grew longer and the hardships piled higher, hope remained the quiet flame that refused to be extinguished among the crew. It was the hope of seeing land again, of feeling solid earth beneath their feet, and of returning to loved ones waiting far beyond the horizon. This hope was fragile, yet it carried the weight of survival itself. It spurred men to haul sails when their muscles burned, to stand watch through endless nights despite exhaustion, and to share the last scraps of food with a companion whose strength was fading. In the harshness of the sea, hope was a silent companion, woven into every whispered prayer, every shared glance, and every steady breath taken against the roaring wind. Without it, the endless ocean might have swallowed them all long ago. But with it, even the most battered ship and the most weary sailor found reason to press forward, toward the unknown, toward life, toward home. Life aboard a medieval ship was a constant negotiation between survival and sacrifice, a delicate balance that each sailor was forced to confront daily. Every decision mattered, from how tightly to secure the sails before a storm, to rationing the dwindling food and water supplies with careful precision. The crew often faced impossible choices. Who would take on the most dangerous tasks? Who would receive the last bit of fresh meat? Who could be spared from exhausting watch shifts? These decisions were not made lightly, and they weighed heavily on captains and crew alike, who understood that the survival of some might depend on the sacrifice of others. There was no room for weakness or hesitation. A single misstep could mean disaster not just for one man, but for everyone aboard. Yet amidst this harsh reality, acts of selflessness and courage emerged. Sailors helping each other climb slick rigging during storms, sharing warmth and words of comfort during long, cold nights. It was this fragile balance of survival and sacrifice that defined the harsh reality of life at sea. A brutal existence where every breath was earned, and every day a battle against the merciless ocean. Familiar silhouette of coastlines brought relief, but it also signaled new challenges. Shallow waters threatened to tear the hull apart on unseen rocks, and unpredictable tides demanded careful navigation through narrow channels. The crew's work shifted from battling the sea's fury to mastering the delicate dance of approach and landing. Yet even as the ship pulled into harbor, the journey was far from over. Sailors faced new trials in unfamiliar ports, language barriers, strange customs, and the ever-present risk of disease in crowded docks. Sometimes what awaited on land was just as dangerous as the ocean. Conflict, exploitation, or harsh labor for little reward. But the promise of solid ground, food, and rest fueled their weary bodies and minds. The return was a bittersweet victory, marking the end of one ordeal and the beginning of another in the harsh world that lay beyond the waves. Though the lives of medieval sailors were harsh and often short, their journeys left a lasting imprint on history and culture. These men braved the unknown, charting new routes and connecting distant lands through trade and exploration. Their ships carried not only goods but ideas, stories, and innovations that shaped the medieval world and beyond. The knowledge they gathered about winds, currents, and celestial navigation paved the way for future generations of sailors and explorers who would eventually cross oceans never before imagined. Yet despite their crucial role, these sailors often remained anonymous, their struggles forgotten beneath layers of time. It is only through careful study of history and the echoes of their voyages that we come to understand the endurance, courage, and resilience that define their existence on the merciless seas. For medieval sailors, the horizon was both a boundary and a beacon, a line that promised safety and yet concealed countless dangers. Every day spent gazing toward that distant edge was a mixture of hope and dread. The sea seemed endless, vast beyond comprehension, and the horizon shifted like a mirage, sometimes teasing, sometimes mocking. Sailors learned to read the subtle changes in color and light, searching for signs of land, weather, or other ships. Yet the sea never revealed its secrets easily. Each voyage tested their endurance and resolve, reminding them that beyond the endless horizon lay uncertainty and the ever-present threat of the unknown. Still, they sailed onward, propelled by necessity, curiosity, and the unyielding human spirit that drives us to explore beyond what is safe and known. Amidst the relentless struggle against wind and waves, sailors also experienced rare moments of calm, quiet interludes when the sea lay smooth and the sky stretched wide and blue. These moments were both a blessing and a challenge. The stillness allowed time for rest and repair, for reflection and quiet conversation among the crew. Yet, the calm also bred impatience and unease, for it was a reminder that the sea's fury could return without warning. During these quiet times, sailors would mend sails, clean the deck, and prepare for the next storm. They shared stories, sang muted songs, or simply watched the endless water stretch into the horizon, finding solace in the rhythmic lapping of waves. These pauses between tempests were a fragile respite, brief breaths in a journey defined by hardship and endurance. They allowed men to gather strength, both physical and mental, to face whatever the sea would throw at them next. After countless days battling the endless ocean, the journey finally came to an end. The sight of familiar shores, the feel of solid ground beneath weary feet, and the sound of bustling ports brought relief unlike any other. Yet, the voyage left its mark on every man who sailed those harsh seas, etched in scars, memories, and a quiet understanding of the fragile balance between human will and nature's vast power. Though the world has changed, the endurance and courage of medieval sailors remain a testament to the human spirit's resilience. Their stories, often forgotten, echo through time as reminders of survival against all odds, of brotherhood forged in adversity, and of the unyielding quest to navigate the unknown. As their ships disappeared into history, the lessons they carried onward shaped the future of exploration, forever linking those who dared to face the merciless sea with the endless horizons beyond. Communication on medieval ships was limited to shouted commands, hand signals, and occasional bells or horns. With the constant roar of the wind and crashing waves, clear communication was difficult, especially during storms or battles. Orders had to be concise and repeated quickly, leaving little room for confusion. Over time, food would harden, mold, or attract insects and rats, forcing the crew to ration strictly and eat whatever was left, no matter how unappetizing. Spoiled food often led to illness, weakening the men and lowering morale. To combat this, cooks and officers regularly inspected supplies, tossing out the worst barrels and trying to stretch good food as far as possible. The constant fear of starvation shaped every decision made on board. Navigating the vast, featureless ocean was one of the greatest challenges medieval sailors faced, demanding skill, knowledge, and sometimes a bit of luck. Without modern instruments, sailors relied heavily on celestial navigation, reading the stars, the sun, and even the moon to determine their position and direction. The North Star, Polaris, was their most trusted guide in the northern hemisphere, holding a fixed point in the sky that allowed them to estimate latitude. Sailors used tools like the astrolabe and later the quadrant, devices that measured the angle between the horizon and celestial bodies, giving crucial information for plotting their course. But these instruments required clear skies, a rare luxury in the often cloudy, stormy ocean. The art of dead reckoning was also vital. Sailors estimated their position by calculating their speed, direction, and elapsed time since their last known location. But this method was prone to errors, especially during storms or strong currents. Charts were scarce and often inaccurate, based on hearsay and previous voyages rather than precise measurements. Many maps included mysterious drawings of sea monsters or unknown lands, reflecting the fears and myths of the time rather than reliable geography. Weather and currents could mislead even the most experienced navigators. A sudden storm could push the ship miles off course. Currents could pull the vessel in unexpected directions. The horizon itself was deceptive, shifting with the light and weather, sometimes making distant land look closer or farther than it really was. The margin for error was small, and a wrong turn could mean weeks of delay or disaster. Sailors learned to watch the sea and sky closely. The color of clouds, the direction of the wind, the behavior of birds, all clues that helped them guess what lay ahead. Certain birds were known to travel only a limited distance from land, so their presence was a hopeful sign. Floating debris or seaweed could also indicate proximity to shore. Despite these skills, navigating was often a gamble. Captains had to balance hope, experience, and cautious calculation while accepting that much remained out of their control. Every journey was a dance with uncertainty, where the ocean was both a path and a labyrinth, offering freedom but demanding respect. This complex relationship between man, sea, and sky defined the medieval sailors' existence. Their survival depended not only on physical endurance but on their ability to read the world beyond their ship, a world filled with mystery, danger, and fragile hope. Storms were the greatest enemy of medieval sailors, unpredictable and violent, testing every ounce of their strength and skill. The sky could darken rapidly, the wind howling like a living beast, and waves rising like towering walls of water that threatened to engulf the ship. The roar of thunder and crack of lightning were constant reminders of nature's fury, as men scrambled to secure sails and tighten rigging while the deck pitched and rolled beneath their feet. The rain was cold and unrelenting, soaking through their clothes and chilling them to the bone, while the spray of seawater made every surface slick and treacherous. In these moments, teamwork and discipline were vital. Orders had to be heard and obeyed instantly. Hesitation could mean catastrophe. Sailors climbed the rigging to reef sails or cut away damaged canvas, hands raw and numb from the cold. The captain's voice was a beacon amidst chaos, guiding the crew through the storm's fury with calm authority. Yet, despite their best efforts, many ships did not survive these tempests. Shipwrecks were common, sending men plunging into icy waters or crashing against jagged rocks along unknown coasts. Rescue was rare, and many were lost to the sea's merciless depths. The fear of storms haunted sailors constantly. Even on calm days, the memory of past tempests lingered, a shadow over every decision. Some believed storms were punishment from angry gods or spirits, while others saw them as inevitable tests of their endurance. Regardless, every voyage was a gamble with fate, and the bravery of those who faced these dangers remains a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Beyond the physical dangers of storms, hunger, and cold, medieval sailors faced an invisible but equally relentless enemy: exhaustion and mental fatigue. Days blended into nights without clear markers of time, as the sun dipped below the horizon and rose again through shifting clouds. Sleep was scarce and fitful, snatched in short bursts whenever the ship's work allowed. The constant motion of the vessel made restful sleep nearly impossible, rocking men awake or causing dizziness and nausea. Fatigue dulled senses, slowed reflexes, and made even simple tasks feel monumental. It was not uncommon for sailors to fall ill simply from the strain of unending labor and stress. Mentally, the endless isolation weighed heavily. The vast emptiness of the ocean, the endless horizon, and the monotony of routine bred a creeping despair in many hearts. Some men turned inward, lost in memories or dreams of home. Others sought solace in camaraderie, sharing stories or singing muted songs to break the silence. But for all, the strain was a constant companion, threatening to erode morale and hope. Captains had to manage not only the ship's course but the mental well-being of their crew, balancing harsh discipline with moments of leniency to keep spirits from breaking. Despite all these hardships sailors endured, they learned to push beyond pain and fear, driven by the knowledge that survival required both body and mind to remain strong. Their resilience under such relentless strain speaks to the depth of human endurance and the power of hope amidst adversity. Life on a medieval ship was governed by a strict hierarchy. an unyielding chain of command that ensured order and discipline in the face of constant danger. The captain stood at the top, wielding absolute authority over every aspect of the voyage. His decisions were final and his word was law. Beneath him were officers and specialized crew members, first mate, quartermaster, bosun, each with defined roles essential to the ship's operation. The first mate was the captain's right hand, responsible for day-to-day management of the crew and overseeing work on deck. The quartermaster managed supplies and discipline, while the bosun cared for the rigging, sails, and hull. This clear structure was vital, especially when storms threatened or crises unfolded. Without it, chaos would quickly take hold, dooming the ship and crew. Orders had to be executed swiftly and precisely, sometimes in life-or-death moments. Yet leadership extended beyond command. It required skill, wisdom, and an understanding of the crew's morale and needs. A captain below the wooden deck, life was a grim and unforgiving existence. The lower holds were cramped, dark, and damp, filled with barrels of supplies, ropes, and the ever-present smell of salt and mold. Sailors who slept below deck found little comfort. Hammocks or wooden planks served as beds, often shared in close quarters with rats and insects that scurried through the shadows. Fresh air was scarce, replaced by a stale, heavy atmosphere that clung to skin and clothes. Illness spread quickly in this environment, with poor sanitation and limited medical knowledge turning small wounds into deadly infections. The sounds below deck were a constant reminder of the ship's precarious life. The groan of timbers shifting under the waves, the drip of water through cracks, the occasional crash of cargo shifting during rough seas. Sleep was interrupted by the movements above and the endless rocking of the ship, which made rest uneasy and often incomplete. Food was stored here, but it was meager and often spoiled, forcing men to eat stale rations that offered little nutrition. Despite the hardships, the hold was a refuge from the brutal weather above. During fierce storms, sailors huddled below who ruled with cruelty risked rebellion or desertion, but one too lenient could lose control of the ship. The constant battering of waves and wind meant that a medieval ship was never truly at rest. Every day brought new challenges in keeping the vessel afloat and functional. Sails frayed and tore under the strain of storms, ropes were thin, and the wooden hull was vulnerable to leaks and damage from saltwater and marine creatures like shipworms that could bore into the timbers. Sailors had to be skilled craftsmen as well as sailors, regularly inspecting every part of the ship and performing urgent repairs whenever necessary. Maintaining the sails was critical. A torn or loose sail could mean the loss of speed or maneuverability, leaving the ship vulnerable to storms or enemies. Ropes needed constant checking for frays and breaks, and knots had to be retied with precision. The hull sometimes required caulking, sealing cracks with tar and oakum to keep the seawater out. This work was exhausting and often dangerous, especially when done during rough seas or bad weather. After countless voyages across unforgiving seas, surviving storms, hunger, and isolation, the spirit of the medieval sailor endures as a quiet testament to human resilience. Their lives were shaped by the endless rhythm of waves and wind, by the fragile balance between courage and caution, between hope and despair. Though the hardships were immense and the dangers ever-present, these men forged bonds of brotherhood that transcended the harshness of their world. They navigated by stars and instinct, repaired their vessels with skill and determination, and faced each new dawn with unwavering resolve. Their journeys paved the way for future generations, expanding the boundaries of the known world and deepening humanity's understanding of the ocean's vast mysteries. Though often forgotten by history, their sacrifices and endurance echo across centuries, reminding us of the strength it takes to face the unknown with steady heart and steady hands. In the vast silence of the sea, the legacy of the medieval sailor remains, a symbol of perseverance, courage, and the unyielding quest to survive and explore beyond the horizon. One of the most pressing challenges medieval sailors faced was securing and preserving fresh water for the journey ahead. Unlike food, water could not be salted or dried. It was perishable and heavy to store. Ships carried barrels filled with fresh water, but these supplies were limited and often contaminated during long voyages, making thirst a constant threat. To stretch their water supply, sailors sometimes resorted to drinking weak beer or ale, which, due to the brewing process, was less likely to carry harmful bacteria. This beer, often called small beer, had low alcohol content but provided hydration and a small amount of nutrition. Brewing aboard ships was rare but not unheard of. The salty air, damp conditions, and limited ingredients made it difficult to produce reliable batches, but some captains understood the value of beer for morale and health. However, even with beer, dehydration remained a major concern, especially in hot climates or during storms when the crew worked harder and sweated more. Sailors had to ration their water carefully, balancing the immediate need to quench thirst with the necessity of preserving enough for the entire voyage. The fight against thirst was as much a mental struggle as a physical one, with the ever-present fear that the water would run out before land was reached. Medieval sailors faced the daunting challenge of securing enough food to survive long voyages where fresh supplies were scarce or non-existent. Their diet was largely limited to preserved foods like hardtack, a dry, dense biscuit made from flour and water, salted or dried meat, and occasionally dried legumes. These rations, while calorie-dense and durable, were monotonous, often tasteless, and lacked essential nutrients, contributing to illnesses like scurvy. The preservation methods were primitive. Salt was the main preservative, but over time even salted meats could spoil or become infested with maggots, forcing men to eat whatever they could to avoid starvation. To supplement these rations, sailors relied heavily on fishing during calm weather. Fishing was both a practical necessity and a brief respite from the grueling routine. Using nets, lines, and simple hooks, sailors cast into the sea hoping for a catch that could provide fresh protein and break the monotony of their diet. Fish like cod, herring, and mackerel were common catches, depending on the region and season. Fresh fish was a precious gift, offering vitamins and hydration, and was often cooked quickly over small fires on deck or eaten raw when cooking was impossible. Fishing was not without risk or difficulty. The sea was unpredictable, and calm conditions needed to fish effectively were rare. Handling slippery fish and gear on a rocking, often wet deck required skill and teamwork. Many sailors lacked formal training in fishing, learning instead through trial, error, and oral tradition passed down from seasoned crew members. Fishing also had a psychological benefit. The brief distraction from the monotony of shipboard life boosted morale and gave men a sense of control in an otherwise hostile environment. In addition to fishing, sailors sometimes gathered seaweed or other edible ocean plants when near shore, though this was less common. Fresh water from rainfall was collected when possible, but depended heavily on weather conditions. The scarcity and monotony of food aboard medieval ships were among the greatest hardships, shaping the daily lives and health of every sailor. Life aboard a medieval ship was not only a test of physical endurance, but also a complex web of social interactions, tensions, and power struggles. The cramped, confined quarters forced men of different backgrounds, temperaments, and ranks into constant proximity, breeding both camaraderie and conflict. Sailors often came from varied regions and social classes, speaking different dialects and bringing their own customs and prejudices aboard. These differences could spark disagreements that ranged from petty disputes over food or duties to violent confrontations. The strict hierarchy was designed to maintain order, but it also created friction. Officers and captains held significant power, sometimes abusing it, while ordinary sailors struggled under harsh discipline and grueling work. Resentment could simmer, especially during long voyages when stress and exhaustion lowered patience. Fights could erupt over perceived slights, stolen rations, or even simple misunderstandings. Despite these tensions, a sense of brotherhood often developed among the crew. Shared hardship and mutual dependence fostered loyalty and cooperation essential for survival. Rituals and routines such as communal meals, work shifts, and religious observances helped create structure and alleviate the psychological strain of shipboard life. Maintaining morale was a constant challenge for leadership. Captains needed to balance firm discipline with moments of leniency, rewarding hard work and punishing insubordination carefully. Mutiny was a feared but real threat. It could lead to chaos and doom the entire voyage. Stories of mutinies circulated widely, reminding sailors of the thin line between order and anarchy. Understanding and navigating these social dynamics was as vital as mastering the ship itself. The fragile balance between conflict and cooperation shaped the daily reality of medieval sailors, influencing not only their survival, but the success of every voyage. On the relentless sea, where danger and hardship were constant companions, sailors clung not only to physical tools and skills, but also to mental and emotional sustenance. Rest was scarce, and yet moments of respite, whether brief or extended, were vital for maintaining morale and preventing despair. Amidst the grueling routines and endless toil, sailors developed rituals and small traditions that provided comfort and a sense of normalcy. Sleep was often fitful and broken, with sailors taking turns standing watch while others tried to catch what rest they could. Hammocks or narrow bunks below deck were crowded and uncomfortable, but these few hours of sleep were precious. When weather allowed, men took advantage of calm seas to rest on deck, soaking in brief sunshine or fresh air. Even a few minutes of quiet reflection could bolster spirits against the relentless stresses of ocean life. Rituals extended beyond rest. Sailors often shared simple meals together, turning mealtime into a social occasion that fostered camaraderie. Singing sea shanties or telling stories helped pass the time, coordinating work while lifting spirits. Religious observances, prayers, blessings, or rituals offered solace and a way to confront the unknown. Superstitions, while sometimes feared, also gave sailors a feeling of control and protection, comforting them against the vast uncertainty of the sea. These moments, small though they were, created bonds and a shared identity that transformed a group of individuals into a crew. They reminded men that they were not alone, that their hardships were shared, and that together they could endure. In the harsh world of medieval sailing, such intangible threads of morale were as essential as sails or ropes, weaving a fabric strong enough to hold them through the darkest storms. Life aboard a medieval ship was fraught not only with external dangers but also with invisible threats in the form of disease. The cramped quarters, poor hygiene, and limited nutrition created perfect conditions for illness to spread rapidly through the crew. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was one of the deadliest diseases sailors faced, leading to weakness, bleeding gums, and eventually death if untreated. Other common ailments included dysentery, typhus, and respiratory infections, all exacerbated by the damp, cold, and unsanitary conditions below deck. Medical knowledge at the time was rudimentary and often based on superstition or tradition rather than science. Ship surgeons or barbers, if present, had limited tools and training. Treatments ranged from herbal remedies and bloodletting to prayers and charms. The lack of fresh food and clean water made recovery difficult, and even minor wounds could become fatal due to infection. Sailors learned to recognize symptoms and sometimes resorted to their own remedies or advice passed down orally. Quarantine was impossible on a crowded ship, so disease often spread unchecked, decimating crews and weakening the vessel's ability to function. The psychological toll was immense. Watching comrades suffer and die bred fear and despair. Captains had to balance the need to maintain order with compassion, often making difficult decisions about who could continue working and who needed rest. Despite these hardships, some sailors survived through sheer resilience and luck. The threat of disease was a silent but ever-present enemy, shaping every voyage and reminding all aboard that survival depended as much on health as on seamanship or courage. In the unpredictable and often terrifying world of the medieval sea, sailors turned to rituals and superstitions as a way to make sense of their dangerous environment and to seek protection from the unknown. These beliefs were woven into daily life and acted as a psychological safeguard against the ever-present threats of storms, shipwrecks, and death. Many of these superstitions originated from ancient traditions, passed down through generations, blending fear with hope. For example, sailors believed that certain actions could bring bad luck, such as whistling on deck, which was thought to summon storms, or setting sail on a Friday, a day often associated with misfortune. The sight of a black cat was sometimes welcomed as a good omen, while other animals or strange occurrences might be interpreted as warnings from the spirits of the sea. Sailors also placed great importance on names. Ships were often named after saints or mythological figures to invoke protection. Rituals ranged from the practical to the symbolic. Before departure, a ship might be blessed by a priest, or sailors would make offerings to sea gods to ensure safe passage. During voyages, sailors would carry charms or talismans, small objects believed to ward off evil. When storms threatened, certain prayers or chants were recited, and rituals were performed in an attempt to calm the raging sea. While these beliefs may seem superstitious by modern standards, for medieval sailors, they provided comfort and a sense of control amid chaos. They helped forge a collective identity and brought a measure of psychological resilience necessary to face the unknown and the merciless ocean. In many ways, these rituals were as vital to survival as the skills of sailing and navigation. The endless expanse of the ocean, stretching in all directions without sign of land, exerted a profound psychological toll on medieval sailors. Isolation was one of the harshest conditions endured on these voyages. Cut off from families and familiar surroundings for weeks or months, sailors faced not only physical dangers but also mental challenges that could be just as crippling. The monotony of the sea, punctuated only by the relentless rhythm of waves and wind, were heavily on the mind. Sailors struggled with feelings of loneliness, homesickness, and anxiety. The vastness of the ocean emphasized their smallness and vulnerability, making the unknown ahead feel even more ominous. At times, men reported visions or hallucinations brought on by exhaustion and stress. This sense of disconnection could lead to despair or resignation, threatening to break the fragile morale of the crew. To combat this, sailors relied on routines, rituals, and camaraderie. Shared tasks and collective responsibilities gave purpose to each day. Storytelling and singing helped pass time and fostered a sense of community. Faith played a crucial role, with prayers and religious observances providing hope and a connection to something larger than themselves. Despite these supports, the psychological battle was ongoing and exhausting. The sea's vastness was a constant reminder that their fate was uncertain, dependent on forces beyond their control. The resilience required to endure these mental hardships was as critical to survival as the ability to navigate storms or repair sails. The human spirit, tested to its limits, persisted in the face of isolation and the relentless sea. The survival of medieval sailors depended heavily on the tools and technologies available aboard their vessels. While far simpler than modern ships, these vessels were equipped with essential equipment that allowed men to endure the hardships of long voyages. Every rope, sail, and wooden plank played a crucial part in the ship's operation and, ultimately, the crew's survival. Ropes made from hemp or flax were lifelines that held sails and rigging together. Sailors spent hours maintaining these ropes, weaving new lines and repairing worn ones, knowing that a snapped rope in the midst of a storm could mean disaster. Sails, often made from heavy canvas, were the ship's engine, catching the wind to propel the vessel. Their shape, size, and position had to be carefully adjusted depending on wind conditions, a task requiring great skill and coordination. The ship's rudder allowed for steering, but it was heavy and required strength and technique to maneuver, especially during rough seas. The anchor was another critical tool, dropped to prevent the ship from drifting in dangerous waters or to hold position near shore. Anchors were large iron hooks connected to heavy chains or ropes, and dropping or weighing anchor was a laborious process demanding teamwork. Other tools included the carpenter's kit, hammers, saws, nails, and tar to repair hull damage, and the navigation instruments like the compass and astrolabe, which helped plot the ship's course. Even simple items like barrels for storing water and food were indispensable. Though primitive by today's standards, these tools and technologies represented centuries of maritime knowledge, refined through experience and necessity. Their proper use required skill, discipline, and cooperation, turning a fragile wooden vessel into a floating home capable of surviving the unpredictable and often merciless sea. Medieval sailors did not only contend with the elements, they also faced threats from human enemies, pirates, and naval forces that prowled the seas. Piracy was a widespread and terrifying danger. Pirates preyed upon merchant vessels, raiding ships for cargo, supplies, and sometimes even capturing crews for ransom or slavery. These attacks were sudden and brutal, often leaving little chance for defense. Merchant ships were usually not heavily armed, relying on speed and maneuverability to escape danger. Some carried small numbers of soldiers or armed sailors, but facing well-equipped pirates was always risky. The threat of attack forced captains to stay vigilant, maintaining watches around the clock, especially in known pirate-infested waters. Naval warfare between kingdoms also affected sailors. During times of conflict, ships could be commandeered for military purposes or face blockades and battles at sea. Sailors might be pressed into service, fighting not only for survival but for political and territorial power. The sea was a battlefield where strategy, courage, and the ability to endure harsh conditions determined victory or defeat. These human dangers added another layer of stress and danger to already perilous voyages. Sailors had to be prepared to fight or flee at a moment's notice, their lives hanging in the balance not only from the sea but from the ambitions and greed of men. As the sun set on the medieval era, the sailors who braved the oceans left a legacy far greater than the goods they transported or the lands they touched. Their journeys were stories of endurance, skill, and the unbreakable human will to survive and explore despite overwhelming odds. These men faced storms that could rip ships apart, hunger that gnawed at their strength, diseases that took their comrades, and enemies both natural and human. Yet, with every voyage, they expanded the map of the known world and forged connections that would shape the centuries to come. Their survival depended not only on their hands and tools, but on a complex understanding of the sea, the sky, and themselves. The knowledge of navigation, ship maintenance, and weather prediction, combined with a keen sense of community and resilience, made them pioneers of an age of exploration. Though their names are often lost to history, the spirit of medieval sailors endures, reminding us of the courage required to face the unknown and the sacrifices made on the vast and unforgiving ocean. Today, when we look out over the endless horizon, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before, men who, centuries ago, dared to set sail into the great unknown, surviving through sheer will and an unyielding bond with the sea.